Chicago Tonight, Black Voices is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight Black Voices on our new day and time. I'm Brandis Friedman and thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. On the show tonight, for our new time, back to back with Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, a crossover discussion with Black and Latino journalists on how the mayor's new budget proposal impacts both communities. How Illinois' clean energy bill doubles as a power surge for equity efforts. Pioneering Black filmmaker Melvin Van Peebles died this week at age 89. We'll look back at his best-known film.
Those histories begin to tell a lot about where we are today.
And the Visitor Center at Chicago's first and only national monument opened this month in Pullman. The role the neighborhood played in American history. First off tonight, Mayor Lori Lightfoot unveiled her $16 billion city budget proposal this week. Now city council deliberations are underway on the budget plan, which surprised some alderpeople with its progressive bent. In her budget address, the mayor characterized the plan as, quote, bold, definitive, and transformative.
Our value statements must be bold, definitive, and transformative. Our ultimate goal with this recovery and resiliency budget is to recover and develop Chicago into a safer, stronger, and more prosperous city in which people can take root in, raise a family, build a business, and make a better lives for themselves.
And the budget also boosts police spending, adding $189 million to Chicago Police Department coffers for a total of about $1.9 billion. Joining us now with more on the mayor's budget proposal are four reporters: Carlos Ballesteros at Injustice Watch, Adam Rhodes from the Chicago Reader, Brandon Pope at CW26, and Jamie NESBITT Golden from Block Club Chicago. Thanks to the four of you for joining us. So Brandon Pope, let's start with you, please. You know, the mayor was explicit that the budget contained no cuts to services, layoffs, no new taxes, but $2 billion of this budget comes from the one-time federal stimulus. So what happens beyond 2022?
That's the devil's in the details with that, right? I mean, you see a lot of social spending here, less taxation, but when it comes to social spending, the problem you often get is it comes back in later years, somebody having to pay for it. So that's something to really keep an eye on with this budget going forward. If we get this universal basic income idea, we get all these other great progressive ideas, is it going to fall back on taxpayers later on down the line?
Right, how can you continue paying for that? Adam, so another one of the more, as we just heard Brandon mention, one of the more progressive items, this basic income pilot, $30 million to give 5,000 low-income families $500 a month for a year. What is the likelihood that that pilot becomes permanent, that it is sustainable?
So there are pilots like this in dozens of cities and towns around the country. And it provides very important relief for the lowest income citizens in the country. And I think if Chicago genuinely cares about the lowest income and most vulnerable people in its city, it will become permanent.
Jamie NESBITT Golden, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on that as well. What is the likelihood that that is sustainable, and how useful might that be to the families who receive it?
I think it'd be incredibly useful considering the last year and where our unemployment rates are now. That said, I cannot share Adam's enthusiasm or optimism, rather. I think sort of making this permanent will be an uphill battle. While we do have a record number of progressive council members, we do have a lot of sort of old school neoliberal folks who aren't really all that sold on the issue. So I think it's a sort of a wait and see thing, but I don't think it's gonna stick.
Well, and at the same time, Carlos Ballesteros, what happens to those families then that come to depend on that $500 a year? Isn't that the intention of basic income programming?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that they decided to make this a one-year pilot, because it's really hard to make any conclusions in a program this size and with this kind of a mission in just 1 year. So yeah, I don't know. It's tough to make any predictions. But I will say, from personal experience of growing up in a low-income household in Chicago, $500 a month would make a huge difference.
Yeah, a lot of families, I think, in previous pilots have demonstrated that. For some folks, it may only seem like $500 a month, but if you're that family receiving it and in need, it is a lot. So we talked to the leaders of two social justice organizations about the allocation of funding for police in the mayor's proposed budget. Here's what they had to say.
So if the mayor truly wants to address the issues that are responsible for the crime in our communities, that are responsible for the violence, she needs to do more than invest $200 million more into our police. I know there's also been some money put into violence prevention. I understand that. But when you show me your budget, you're also showing me your priorities. And right now our priorities are saying that the police is her primary way of addressing the violence and public safety issues in our community. We would expect and hope at Social Change and other organizations and advocates across the nation, but particularly in Chicago, that more money be invested in frontline efforts and strategies that actually address violence, actually address public safety, and make sure people can overcome the hurdles that often lead to crime.
What I'm just not seeing is any innovation within the budget. It seems to be kind of the same status quo, and every year, unfortunately, that particular department the money is increasing. And it's all for cases that they're doing in terms of things that are happening with citizens. It's the shot spotter technology and probably other technology that needs to be evaluated. So it's just, I just think that's one of those budgets that you have to do a really deep dive to think about before you go to an increase.
Todd Belcourt, Social Change there, and Aisha Butler at Rage in Inglewood, a couple of familiar faces on Chicago Tonight, Black Voices. Jamie, do you think residents and neighbors will be satisfied with how this budget addresses safety?
Well, it depends on who you talk to in the South Side. So you have activists, you have more progressive activists who, like Aisha, feel that, this doesn't really address the root causes. But then you have other folks, who are longtime homeowners, like folks in Chatham or say, Bronzeville, who feel like this, means that they'll get more police protection, that they'll get, increased foot patrols. And that's the sort of thing that they've been worried about. There has been sort of upticks in crime in places here and there, and they want that security. That said, a lot of this budget is going towards, pensions and retroactive pay, but none of this is going towards, say, witness protection. We're asking folks to, step up and say something, and if they see something and they're not getting that protection that they need to feel safe. I speak with mothers of grieving parents who, mothers of grieving children rather, who have asked, police for help in, say, when their daughters are, sort of witness to a crime and they're not getting that help. And I think there has to be a point where CPD sort of addresses this, and the mayor to that extent.
Brandon Pope, we just heard Todd Belcourt say, show me your budget and that will show me your priorities. What do you think this budget says about the mayor's priorities?
Well, an 11% increase sends a message that Lightfoot believes that policing, lack of police resources, and bolstering that is the answer to fixing public safety. But she also made the same statement that we have to learn from history and not make mistakes of the past. Well, increasing police spending is a mistake of the past. Police spending across the country, not just in Chicago, has been bloated, has been increasing, has tripled in Chicago since 1964, according to Injustice Watch. And yet public safety hasn't improved. In fact, we still have the issues we've been having for decades. So at some point you have to look at different solutions and actually learn from history. This budget doesn't exactly do that part as she claimed it would.
Adam Rose, your reaction to what some residents and neighbors are saying about whether they're satisfied with this kind of spending on the police budget?
Yeah, I think there is pretty much a very widespread concern that any increase to the police budget at this point is unacceptable, especially in the last year with how violent the police were to protesters downtown, the protesters protesting the Columbus statue, truly, and some protesters at the Adam Thalelo protest, truly, I think there's been so much overwhelming police violence this past year that for many people, quite frankly, rightly so, any increase to the police budget is unacceptable. And I think there's probably going to be a defense from the police department, from the city, that, like, you know, these are contractual obligations, but there's nothing stopping the city from taking that money out of a program that only harms people in the police department, and then just funding it that way without having to spend this additional, I think it's $880 something million.
And
Also,
sorry. Well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and jump in because we're almost out of time. Carlos, you know, what should we be looking for with regard to dissenting opinions in the city council? Is there going to be a big fight in about 20 seconds?
Yes, there's always a big fight in city council. Everything is a big fight in city council. But, you know, I think there were some comments made today by Alderman Lindsey Harrison and some other folks that really called into question the efficacy of the violence prevention programs that are being funded in this budget. There's also like questions about whether a lot of the things that are new are sustainable. Is this a one-time thing? Is this the mayor leading up to her re-election campaign, you know? So, well, you know, I think all of these things will come into question.
Yeah, we'll all be watching, I'm sure. Thanks to our panelists, Carlos Ballesteros, Adam Rhodes, Brandon Pope, and Jamie Nesbitt Golden. Up next, how the state's new energy bill strives for racial equity. Stay with us. Illinois' gigantic new energy law will change the source of the state's power into the future. The package aims to move Illinois to carbon-free energy by 2045, but it also serves to tip the scales in terms of who makes up the transforming energy industry. Amanda Venneke joins us now with more. Amanda, what does this law do in terms of equity?
Well, Brandis, so that gigantic law is dubbed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, and the governor just signed it last week. Sort of like you can't judge a book by its cover. It's not always wise to judge a law by its title, but in this case, it actually may be appropriate. I talked with one person who was really involved with drafting the legislation, and he said that it is going to be a game changer. In what ways? Well, let's start with jobs.
As we tail off the use of fossil fuels, as we tail off the use of nuclear energy, we have to significantly ramp up, you know, the use of green energy, wind and solar, to power the state of Illinois. And right now, we just don't have enough people to do it.
Representative Will Davis says there aren't enough people, period, that are even trained to do this sort of work, but he is particularly concerned that there aren't enough people of color. And there's a report backing that up. It found that people of color made up about 27% of Illinois' clean energy industry last year. Now, revamping the energy sector presents an opportunity to change that.
In the next 10 years, renewable energy businesses are going to create more than 50,000 new jobs, building projects in every corner of the state that saves consumers money and fights climate change. We are proud of the diversity and equity commitments in this legislation, and we look forward to making sure that as the renewable energy industry grows, it fully reflects the diversity of Illinois.
And really, equity is woven throughout this entire package. So it creates a green bank that will provide seed money to help Black and brown contractors who may otherwise have a hard time accessing capital. It also provides other financial assistance. There's support for those leaving prison to enter into the clean energy workforce. And the new law spends $80 million a year that will be paid for by taxpayers on development programs for individuals from what the law calls equity-focused communities, and those are largely communities of color.
We have 13 workforce hubs that will be providing training. They will be providing support for workers. They will be providing things like tools and placement services and retention services and travel stipends, and for those that need them, childcare. There are also going to be workforce hubs that will be providing pre-apprenticeship programs as well.
The law sets requirements to make sure the intended diversity goals are met. Illinois is beefing up that renewables industry through financial incentives, but only contractors that meet diversity thresholds will be able to access those incentives.
For me, as we talk about the projects, whether they be projects put on the roof of a house, up through community solar, as well as utility scale solar, there needs to be a place for Black companies, Black and brown companies, to be able to get into the game, be able to get their feet settled, get their feet wet, and then to be able to grow over time.
While 2045 is decades away, a lot of this work is already getting underway, and then this new law gives it a huge boost.
When I look forward and I'm thinking about 2045, what I visualize is a clean energy workforce in the state of Illinois that resembles the demographics of the state. I see Black and brown businesses growing. I see Black and brown contractors being able to hire people from their communities.
And he also says he sees a future in which many of the communities that are dealing with toxic pollutants right now will no longer have to be dealing with that in 2045. He also sees a future in which solar panels are on rooftops throughout the city, and electric vehicles and charging stations are all over Illinois, including in communities of color. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. Good reporting. For some people, walking through Chicago's Pullman neighborhood is like going back in time. Now, a new visitor center in the century-old clock tower building will tell the story of the historic town. Jeffrey Baer visited Pullman ahead of the center's opening for a behind-the-scenes look.
Does this look like part of the National Park Service? There are no mountains, canyons, or forests in Pullman on Chicago's south side, but the entire neighborhood is a national monument, and what it lacks in scenery, it more than makes up for in history.
This is America's first planned industrial community, and so there's a lot to be learned here.
George Pullman, the 19th century industrialist, revolutionized rail travel with his Pullman Palace car. As his business grew, he opened a factory south of Chicago, and right next door, he built a company town, which he named for himself. It was envisioned as a sort of workers' utopia.
Here, you have indoor plumbing, you have trash pickup, you have everything that a community should have, but built for the worker.
Workers and managers paid rent to Pullman for their homes in the town, which had all the amenities most working people could only dream of. Beautiful architecture, manicured landscaping and parks, a library, a church and theater, all owned and controlled by the Pullman Company. This was the administration building, the epicenter of the whole operation, the factory and the company town. And now it's an epicenter of a different kind. It's the visitor center of Chicago's first and only national monument. Inside, you board a nearly full-sized model of a Pullman sleeper car. All aboard. This was nothing like what people had experienced in train travel.
Prior to the Pullman luxury sleeping cars, travel by rail was very, very uncomfortable, very unpleasant.
The car is actually a gateway to a permanent exhibit about Pullman, the man, the company, and the town, and also Pullman's important and unintended role in America's civil rights and labor movements.
The economic recession occurred in 1894, and the orders dropped off for the Pullman cars. He reduced their hours, he reduced their wages, but he refused to reduce their rent.
Some workers barely had enough to feed their families. Pullman employees walked out, and the conflict quickly escalated into a national railroad strike. President Grover Cleveland sent federal troops to break the strike, resulting in one of the most violent labor conflicts in American history.
At the time, the railroads in the United States were not trying to arbitrate or negotiate with employees.
In the aftermath of the strike, Pullman's company was forced to sell off the town, which was later annexed to Chicago, and President Cleveland made Labor Day a national holiday.
Perhaps a bit of an appeasement for the workers, because the strike did not immediately result in the kind of labor changes that they had hoped for.
Black history is a big part of the Pullman story, too. The company hired former enslaved people as Pullman porters who carried passengers' luggage, served their meals, and even shined their shoes.
On one end, it could be looked at as a terrible job. On the other end, it could be looked at as a footstool for self-development, for carving out the middle class.
Porters worked up to 20 hours a shift, mostly just for tips, and had to sleep on seats in the smoking car. And they faced prejudice and racism from passengers who nicknamed them after Mr. Pullman himself, harkening back to an old slavery practice.
Imagine, your name's Tom, and somebody disrespectfully calls you George. You might as well just say, hey, boy, come here.
But the porters could also eavesdrop on conversations of traveling businessmen.
Through osmosis, they had an opportunity to take that proof of concept back to their communities and start businesses.
The porters also quietly distributed black newspapers like the Chicago Defender and Pittsburgh Courier across the American South, spreading the word about opportunities in the North.
They were the unofficial ushers of the Great Migration.
About 3 decades after the Pullman strike and the death of George Pullman, the porters overcame strong company resistance to form America's first major union of black workers, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, led by A. Philip Randolph. Pullman closed its factory in the historic town in 1958. And like many other communities on Chicago's south and west sides, this one has faced significant disinvestment over the last several decades. Buildings from the 19th century deteriorated, and a fire devastated the administration building in 1998. But all along, neighbors and local nonprofits fought to preserve Pullman and its history. The state rebuilt the clock tower in 2005, and in 2015, neighbors scored a huge victory when President Barack Obama declared Pullman a national monument for its significance both past and present.
Not a week goes by that there is not a headline where I hear a part of the story of today harken back to the issues of race, immigration, labor, capitalism, government regulation, gender equity. You name it, we're still in the middle of that story.
In recent years, companies like Method, Whole Foods, and Amazon have come to the area.
In just a few short years, we have accomplished a lot, and so we still have a long way to go.
Some leaders say the community once thought to be a model for company towns may now be a model for revitalization, with tourists as a driving force.
We're going to give them some place to shop, we're going to give them some place to sleep, we're going to give them some place to eat, and we're going to keep those tax dollars flowing right here in the community.
Ninth Ward Alderman Anthony BEALE says preservation and restoration efforts are far from over through the combined efforts of nonprofit community developer Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, philanthropic organizations like the historic Pullman Foundation, and city, state, and federal agencies.
To be able to see an area like this, be able to rebound and be able to come back through tourism, not through some kind of quick fix method, but through tourism and history, is an important thing. And I really think is a blueprint for what you can do to other areas of the South Side.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Jeffrey Baer.
The new visitor center is at 111th Street and South Cottage Grove, a few blocks north of where the old visitor center was located. And if you want to learn more about Pullman, particularly its ties to the Black labor movement and civil rights, join our community conversation Monday night at 8 p.m. Visit WTTW.com/events to RSVP. And we're back with more right after this. Filmmaker, playwright, musician, and Chicago native Melvin Van Peebles died this week at the age of 89. In 1981, WTTW's movie review show Sneak Previews took a deep dive into Black cinema. Host Gene Siskel discussed how Van Peebles' 1971 art house film Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song riveted audiences with its gritty depiction of a black man on the run from racist police officers. Here's a clip.
It was like a bolt of lightning. Black and white audiences were thunderstruck. Here, for the first time in a long time, was a movie about a black winner, a man who did it all for himself and virtually by himself. This movie spoke to a lot of black moviegoers in a more aggressive way than some of Sidney Poitier's films. Sweetback was the story of a scruffy city dude doing his thing, not a glamorous Hollywood hero.
Fun fact, Van Peebles hired a then unknown Chicago band to create the soundtrack for that film. They were named Earth, Wind, and Fire. You can read more about Melvin Van Peebles' life and legacy on our website. And that's our show for this weekend. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News, including details on the Obama Presidential Center groundbreaking. And if you're watching us on Saturday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Sundays beginning at 10 p.m. And join Paris Schutz and me next week on Chicago Tonight. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for sharing part of your weekend with us. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.